Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Please do post where you are in the world. I love to see all of the people who post and get to see, that we have a real global audience, and it makes for an exciting show. My name is Catherine Mattice. I'm the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. And today I have David Liddle with me. And David is in my same world of people and culture and transforming culture. He also just obtained his second edition. Why don't you hold that up, David? His book on conflict resolution or managing conflict. There you go. So I'm super excited to chat with you. Thank you for being with me today.
I'm really excited to be here, Catherine. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and we talked about it earlier, but I love the ray of sunshine pointing right at you. So we expect some amazing, gospel to be spread today. So David, how did you get into the work that you do? Let's start there.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, so we've just had a big thunderstorm go over, but now we've got the light afterwards. Apologies about the light, but yeah. So how did I get into this? So I set up my company, the TCM Group. TCM stood for, at the time, Total Conflict Management, Catherine, developing holistic systems for resolving conflicts, disagreements, quarrels, fights, and feuds in the workplace. So that was in 2001. And prior to that, I ran a charity specialising in restorative practice, non-violence, and mediation in community disputes. I set up a national programme called CRISP, the Conflict Resolution in Schools programme. And then I work in the criminal justice system, bringing restorative practices into the criminal justice system, so victim impact work, empathy work, and then latterly victim offender mediation. Prior to that, I did a degree in race and community relations, so I was really interested in inclusion and exclusion and the social, economic, structural causes of exclusion and discrimination. But I saw firsthand, really, through my work, that one of the most powerful ways of creating an inclusive community, society, and workplace is through the power of dialogue and positive engagement and finding remedies, constructive remedies to often intractable, complex, difficult, challenging, serious issues. So I'm a big fan, a massive fan of the use of dialogue, either assisted or direct, as a tool for tackling some of these perennially challenging issues in our society and in our workplace. So yeah, 22 years of doing this, and we have a lot of fun doing it. I thoroughly enjoy it. And yes, I've got a great team in London, and we work globally with some amazing customers. It's brilliant.
I love it. And we have a global audience today. Thank you all. We got Los Angeles, California, Egypt, and India, and South Africa. Wow. So love this. So please do post questions and comments for David, and we can make sure we get those answered over the course of our show here. So David, tell me, when you help an organization deal with conflict, what's the who's reaching out to you? A lot of my audience are either coaches or consultants or HR professionals. So what are some things to be looking for or thinking about related to how do I know if there's conflict in my organization? What do I do about it?
Yeah, great question. Well, we had conflict in our organisation, Catherine, and I think we see in our organisations often a tendency to what I call expensive inaction avoidance or expensive overreaction when we can't avoid it anymore. I think more and more organisations are recognising that we need to take some form of action, whether that's leaders and managers or HR professionals or others, trying to find a successful remedy. Now, what happened in the early days when I started my work, organisations were embarrassed about conflict. It was all hushed tones and a bit embarrassed. We wouldn't talk about it. So I would be brought in the dead of night to try and find the remedy between the two disputing actors, often in some very intransigent problems that were probably faced in court or some kind of litigation. And you know what, Catherine? Over 90% of cases were resolved through mediation, but no one was talking about it. We were embarrassed about it. Is it mediation, medication, meditation? What is it you do? So what I started to do is I went and banged on the door of HR directors and leaders and said, look, the systems you're using for managing conflict are broken, they're corrosive, they're dysfunctional, they're creating more trauma and harm than the actual problems that created the issue in the first place. So I started to work with organisations to embed the principles of the restorative principles: compassion, kindness, dialogue, engagement, collaboration, positive principled negotiation techniques, positive psychology, into the HR processes, into the leadership capabilities, and into the culture of the organization. So a lot of the work now is about helping to prevent and resolve conflicts and disagreements rather than the very reactive systems that we perhaps have deployed in a great many organizations. So it's a very holistic approach to conflict management.
Right. And that's proactive resolutions or thinking about things proactively are so much better. I mean, I always say, we go into toxic work environments a lot of the time just because of the way that we market ourselves. I'd say 75% of our clients have a real problem that they need help with, and they've been backed into a corner. And that's just so much more expensive to fix. And people are so unhappy. And it's so much better to take a different approach and say, like, we have a client right now that's really great. There's 300 employees. Things are good, but they're not toxic. There's some pockets where people are unhappy, but such a different journey than, just hearing all of the horribleness that happens when something like conflict isn't resolved. And there's so much research that if conflict goes unresolved, it escalates into toxic stuff because people are trying to win or get their power back, or they're gossiping about each other if they're not, and so let's solve conflict.
Absolutely. And it's a great point. I mean, for me, when I'm working with organizations, Kathy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But so I work with a lot of big banks, global organizations, Burberry, KPMG, big broadcasters, airlines, and others. So when I start to look at the policies and procedures in those organizations, particularly the grievance procedure or the bullying procedure or the disciplinary procedure, actually what I see is they're very retributive. It's about reducing a complex issue down to right, wrong, win, lose, attack, defend. They're corrosive. They create this damage and polarization of the parties. They're adversarial. They bang heads together. So these systems are very retributive. It's based on a retributive justice model. So a lot of the work I do is to help organizations remove retribution and introduce a model of justice, which I call transformative justice, which is about procedural justice. It's fair, it's just, it's treating the actors through the process appropriately. But rather than blame, shame, and punish, it's about engagement, dialogue, and coming together to find a solution. And one of the things that fascinates me, and I think fascinates many in HR, is we've forgotten that people have an immense capacity to do harm. We know that. But they also have an immense capacity to do good. And when we create the conditions for people to do good, and we remove those retributive paradigms within the workplace and introduce something which promotes a better version of me, a more brilliant version of me and for the other. And I can think about how I'm feeling and how I'm making you feel and have that empathy. Actually, we can begin to resolve issues. We don't need all of these complex bureaucratic systems, which are, I think, tearing people apart. They act as they sow the seeds of division. And I think from toxicity, they act as the incubators of toxicity. So the systems we've designed to resolve toxic workplaces actually themselves create the toxic workplaces, and the paradox lost on me, and they become self-serving in the organization, these processes, and we forget there are real people. The collateral damage of all of these self-serving processes are real people with real lives. And I think it's about getting back to that sense of putting people before process. I think it's a message I often hear being talked about.
Yeah, we are 100% on the same page, David. I do often say I feel like there's two types of HR professionals: the ones that do focus on compliance and the policies, and then the ones that focus on people. And I noticed on your people and culture website, you have this kind of list of what it looks like when people are first and what it looks like when policy and process is first. And so, yeah, absolutely same page, that if we're focused on policy and solving things through that, it creates more toxicity, and it doesn't solve the problem actually at all. So something else I talk a lot about is that harassment, this very human, horrible experience, is boiled down to a policy. And if someone complains about harassment, it is boiled down to an investigation by, a police officer, HR or an investigator who's really looking to see if something unlawful happened. Well, what about all the other part? Even if, and I get we have to do that because it was unlawful behavior, but man, there's so much missing if you just focus on that. The organization has to think, how did this happen in our organization? What are we doing or not doing that this relationship unfolded the way it did, whether it was unlawful behavior or not, it was harmful, and there's, so yeah, 100%. We're absolutely on the same page. I love that. That's
and what
awesome.
people want.
What's that?
From when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking to people in these situations, Catherine, they're concerned about the impact on themselves, but they also don't want it to happen to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very profound sense of desire, almost like a responsibility to prevent this occurring to other colleagues in the workplace. And one of the big frustrations that we see when we're talking to HR departments, of course, we work with HR and leaders to transform this, is we're also looking at how can we create an environment where we draw insight and learning and draw lessons from these situations, from conflicts, harassment, bullying, grievances, and the like, to then drive structural change and systemic change and cultural change. And actually, when the HR professional, the people and culture professional, releases their vice-like grip on process and focuses instead on people, and actually helping to draw out those learning and insights, then they're actually starting to contribute to the strategic growth and the direction and the value of the organization. And I think actually in so doing, HR becomes singly one of the most strategically important functions in our organizations, and disagreement management and toxic workplace management actually starts to feed in to the growth of the organization. It's not just a case management system within the workplace, which is how I think we treat many of these cases at the moment.
Right, 100%. We're so on the same page. I want to give you a hug. I have a question for you, because here at my organization, we have someone who was a conflict mediator a mediator in the court when there was court-appointed mediation between people. And she works with us. She does a lot of our training programs. She's really fantastic. And she's also certified in dissect. And so she uses dissect. So we don't, doing conflict resolution is not a big service we offer, but when it comes up, we've got her to lean into that. She uses dissect, and so she has both parties take the dissect assessment, and then she has a bit of a coaching session with them both around that, as well as to understand, where they're coming from, what they need, so that she can lead them through mediation. I was just curious about your thoughts on that, since you've written some books on conflict and that's your world.
Yeah, mixed is what I would say. So I think dissect is great. I think insights is great. I think MBTI, all of those personality profiles can be really useful to help me gain an understanding of self and other. As a mediator, I like to work with people to help them in the moment and create moments of truth and moments that matter, where we can gain deep insight into ourselves. And as we gain deep insight into ourselves, we can begin to understand some of those inner conflicts and inner paradoxes and challenges that we experience. But so too, do we have a greater propensity to listen to the other, rather than othering the person in dispute and pointing a finger and wagging. We take a finger and we put it back at ourselves. So yeah, I think those personality profiles and psychometrics play a part, and actually play a part in helping to achieve an outcome, which is insight, understand of myself and of the other. They can be challenging in the mediation process, because we can the downside, if there's something in the cons column, is we can focus in on what's written down in the paper and what my particular profile or my personality profile is, and sometimes I can subcontract to that rather than actually taking personal responsibility for my behavior. So I think they play a part and they help to achieve that awareness. But the downside is we can focus more on the words on the paper than actually the deep reflection of self and behaviors and how they would impact on them. So pros and cons, but no, I've celebrate any work that's done to help bring people together and create that togetherness.
Well, knowing her, she's also certified in IFS, internal family systems. For anybody who doesn't know, it does coaching in that. She's a very holistic type of a person. So I appreciate your comments. I think what her comment was when she started doing that was she found that it just helped cut through some of the arguments where someone might say, I feel like you pick on me or you're too direct. And then the other person's going to say, well, I'm not that way. No one's ever told me that before. And then she can say, well, look at our DISC profiles. You're a D and this other person's not. So maybe that's where some of it's coming from. So I think it helps her kind of help them explain away their differences a little bit, but I know she's certainly not, kind of leaning on it. All right, we have some questions. One person says, HR working in a multinational organization, different people from different cultures. It's not really a question, but I think it's worth commenting on here. Different cultures, different languages, conflict, there's language barriers, and culture handle conflict differently depending on where in the world you are and what your culture is. So curious, some thoughts maybe on how to break down that barrier, help people come to resolution from different cultures.
I can't remember who said it, but I think it's only 7% of what we say is through the words that we speak, Amma. So thank you so much for sharing that. But so much of our communication is how we connect, how we speak non-verbally, how we engage with others. So when we're working with HR teams or leaders and others, yes, we can see some of these language barriers, but of course there's so much technology now that helps us to break through those language barriers. But actually what we want to do is take the adversity out of diversity. And actually what sometimes we see are these barriers, they create divergence or dissonance between the actors or the functions within the organization. And that dissonance can become cemented in. We start to see silo working. We start to see oppositional working. We see competition within the organization. And what really excites me about the modern workplace and the future of the workplace is when we're working with people, professionals and leaders who remove the dissonance and look for building common purpose and aligning people to common cause. So how do we do that? We look to the purpose of the organization. We create purposeful leadership and management. We look to the values of the organization, which becomes a golden thread or a narrative. Doesn't matter your nationality, your language, your background, your faith, your gender, so on and so forth. These begin to unite us. So we're all now facing in the same direction together, trying to achieve a set of common purpose and bound by the set of common purpose. So the things that make us different, which perhaps pulled us apart in the past, now actually create a strength of unity of the diversity that adds growth and strength and value to our organizations, embraced by an HR function who are equipped to empower and enable people to come together. So a sense of connection and belonging. So when we can achieve that and create that space within the workplace, and if HR can lean into that space and make themselves vulnerable in that space, but bringing people together, wow, HR are doing some incredible work and adding real value in terms of the relationships, the experience of individuals, the experience of our customers, of course. So I mean, I hear the challenge, but I see an opportunity.
Yeah, I there's that word vulnerable again, which is an important word. I'm starting to wonder if I need to change my company name to Vulnerability Partners. I really think that is the key to life, because if we disagree, or I feel like you hurt my feelings, or we're not able to work through conflict, or part of our issue is we're from different cultures, we're not understanding each other, to be able to get vulnerable and say, and get in there and talk about it takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of trust in the other person that they're also going to be vulnerable. And so I agree with you. It creates a great opportunity if both parties are willing to lean into that opportunity. We have another great comment that I just wanted to point out. Any team that I've been a part of, if the focus is on how we work together rather than being right, it's more successful. So that is a fantastic comment. 100% agree with you. So thank you for sharing that. We've got a question here. Okay. What advice do you give to multiple employees who have complained to HR about a toxic manager and have collated so much toxic behavior, yet they don't do anything? In fact, they downplay the issue. I have some answers, but I'd love for you to answer.
Yeah. It makes me so sad, Alison, to hear that this could happen and that people's very genuine experiences are overlooked and ignored. And as I said at the start of the session, we see extensive inaction or expensive overreaction as two of the kind of key drivers. I think we might have said that actually before the session when we were speaking, Catherine. So we need people to act. We need people to take actions, to think about how they're interacting and reacting to circumstances. The problem, Alison, within organizations is the systems and the rules that exist within our organization are such that they're not effective at handling these complex, modern interactions between people. So those systems are broken, and HR can see the systems are broken. And they know that by deploying the system, it will be ineffective at dealing with these issues. It makes me very sad to hear this. So what we need is a system within our organizations which focuses more on resolution. So I created a resolution framework for organizations to use. rather than these awful 3-step processes. I call them an escalator to the precipice of doom, these 3-step processes, which don't resolve.
Not dramatic or anything. I love it. Precipice of doom. Yeah, I'm going to start using that.
People's lives. We see mental health, distress, anxiety, self-harm, and in some very serious cases where people complete suicide. Is a dreadful state of affairs. And I think there's a responsibility on the organisation and the key players within the organisation to take this stuff seriously, to listen and engage, and to, if something's not working, as so clearly these systems don't work, the responsibility is to do something different. So we create triaging systems and processes, we create new decision-making processes, and we help the parties to address issues. And also, Alison, and I'll hand over to Catherine, I'd love to hear your views, Catherine, we actively encourage managers, leaders, business partners and others to resolve these issues much sooner and closer to source. This business of responding and reacting very late causes additional trauma and harm to the parties. So building an early resolution and local resolution is a much more effective way of preventing these issues from occurring. But I'm so sorry to hear that those are people's experiences, because these are real people with real lives being really affected by this stuff.
Yeah. And so, Alison, my advice or my comments aren't much more brighter than David. The problem is, so here's the narrative. So I specialize in coaching individuals who are engaging in toxic behavior. Why do companies hire me to do that instead of just firing that toxic person? Because that toxic person, the motivator for toxic behavior is competence. And so the narrative for these people who engage in toxic behavior is they've been fighting to get attention for being competent their whole lives. And it comes from a variety of places. I've had a client who was from the south side of Chicago and grew up, in the ghettos. And so it's like his idea of being competent is like being at the top, the loudest, most aggressive person. I've had a doctor who's a female, the only female in medical school back in the day, not to mention a single mom, which was unheard of back when she was in medical school. So, she's fighting. So I'm not excusing the behavior, but what happens is they're fighting for that competence. And so they become really great performers. And then the leadership becomes afraid to poke at them and call them out and hold them accountable, because they start to see that they feel like the results are more important than the way they're treating people. And so unfortunately, the narrative when I get these calls and I'm on these sales calls is that HR has been trying to solve the problem for a while without the blessing of the C-suite. And then eventually there's unfortunately some sort of catalyst that has to happen. And the CEO finally goes, okay, we need to fix it. And it could be that a bunch of people leave and cite that person. It could be, sometimes it's the first hostile work environment complaint. Sometimes it's the 10th, depending, where the CEO is like, all right, this is complaint number 10. This is the 10th investigation we've done. Apparently we need to fix it. So it just depends on the CEO's kind of tolerance for that kind of behavior. So that's the kind of scenario that you're in. And my advice to you is, if your leaders are showing you they don't care, then you got to leave. That's unfortunately, the organization has to show you that they value you, and they're not showing you that. So you've got to protect yourself. Sorry.
That's exactly right. No, and I think it's sage advice. I think it's important advice. And I think for leaders, but come on, leaders, come on, HR, wake up and smell the conflict. This is going on your watch, and I think it's impacting on your ability to retain good people. To give them the positive experience, to help. It undermines people's productivity, their joy in work, their happiness, their engagement. And this has a detrimental adverse impact on customer experience, on just the whole productivity and performance of the organization. And you as a leader and as a people professional and as a manager have a responsibility to drive and develop successful organizations. So if we're not addressing these issues, your responsibility is not being fulfilled within the organization. So one questions the purpose that's being fed. So it does, I agree with everything you said, Catherine, but we need people to start recognizing that this stuff doesn't just happen under the surface and it doesn't have an impact. It has a significant impact, again, on real people, but on the business. We get it right, people won't want to leave. People will come and join you. You're going to get the best investors. You're going to get the best customers. You're going to get the top talent. They will come to you like a magnet, because that's the place they want to work. It's a great workplace. So defining the way we handle toxicity and conflict, disagreements, these kind of issues we're talking about can become a defining feature of the culture of the workplace. And that for me is so exciting.
Agreed. And Allison has good news. She said she did leave, but unfortunately the manager's been promoted twice, and that's the thing, right? That manager's apparently getting a lot of results, and hopefully you left a comment on Glassdoor and other, you can warn others. So the big question, the title of our show today, which we only have 5 minutes to discuss, is kind of like, what's the future of HR and people and culture? It's, we've gone through this pendulum swing a bit. We got more swinging to do, where people seem to be becoming more and more important to organizations. Are we going to keep going in that direction? What's the future in your mind?
Yeah, so we're really excited about the future. So of HR, I think as HR stands at the moment, it stands at an inflection point, Catherine. Bureaucratic, technocratic, rigid, processes and procedures which are harmful and destructive. On the inflection point, we carry on doing that. HR's role in the workplace, I think, becomes less relevant and potentially becomes obsolete, because people don't need that and it doesn't deliver value. So the current paradigms around HR, I think, are taking HR in a very damaging and worrying space. The good news is there's another path, the path of purpose, of values, of people, of a humanizing environment whereby we get the best from our people. And when HR give up, as I said, that vice-like grip on process, when they recognize that people don't trust the HR function for various reasons, similar to the one Alison set out, but instead of being defensive about that, seek to understand and learn to listen, why is that happening? And rather than being fearful of being seen as the long arm of management, which is how many people see HR, is release yourself from that and become a truly important independent function in the organization. So as HR transforms into a people and culture function, driven by a focus on empowerment, about creating psychologically safe workspaces, inclusive workspaces, sustainable workspaces for people to do their best work and to be the best version of themselves, where HR doesn't sell its soul to go and sit at the table, sit at the strategic table. People and culture doesn't need to sit at the table. People and culture is the table that everyone else sits around. It becomes the singly most strategically important function in our organization that everyone is part of and engaging with, where it learns to cooperate, to collaborate, to build allyships within the workplace, creating a new social contract with our employees based on mutual trust and respect, understanding civility, some of these core fundamental principles. When the people professional HR transforms into this, and when I launch People and Culture, my next book will be on people and culture, the transition from HR to a modern people profession. I'll be examining some of these issues. I think when People and Culture does this, as we're seeing it happening now, it's so exciting to see it happening. When it's happening, I think it releases enormous value, social value, stakeholder value, and of course, contributing to shareholder value, wealth generation within the organization. And this is, to me, the most exciting transition of HR in a generation or longer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the younger generation too, coming through the ranks, where as the baby boomers continue to retire, that idea of work, you work for a paycheck is really going to start to be dead in the water over time. So I think, the younger generation has grown up in a world where in elementary school, they were talking about emotional intelligence. My daughter is 9 and her school does this whole thing with the Covey's 7 Habits in the kid version. And they're learning all these things about humanness that we didn't learn. And so I think, that as the generations continue to shift, I think this is not going anywhere. This idea that people are important. We've been talking about it forever, but I mean, sometimes I feel like I shouldn't have a job. Why do I have a consulting business that's thriving? I don't know that it's okay. Because it means there's a lot of problems that we need to solve. And the more organizations focus on their people, the better off they'll be, and the people in there will be. So thanks,
Absolutely.
David, for joining me today. And if anybody wants to get a hold of David, by all means, you can find him here on this page where we're streaming. His contact information, or reach out on LinkedIn. And thank you all, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thanks so much, David.
Catherine, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's great meeting you today.
Me too. Thanks.